Hello, Cecilie and Max. So glad you're with us, and you're based in Papua New Guinea, so it's hard to track you down. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. Nice to see you again.
Lovely to see you too. Listen, the reason why we have you on is because I was told that I would be remiss if I did not have Max and Cecilie Benjamin on with Walindi and Febrina and Mahonia Na Dari, all the things that you do in Papua New Guinea. And I have to say, PNG cannot be the easiest place to do business. So I'm just going to start off by asking you, how did you end up there in the first place? And then how did you decide you were going to get into dive tourism?
I'll better start on that one.
Yeah.
I was the first to go there. When I was young, back in Perth, where I was born, I developed an interest in Papua New Guinea. I guess through my stamp collection. They used to have these wonderful stamps of the warriors' heads on the stamps. And then, this was back in the 50s into the early 60s. Of course, there was a lot of the Australian soldiers returned from the war, and Papua New Guinea was very important in the Second World War to Australia, and that's how I developed my interests. And after I'd finished agricultural college, I was recruited to go and work up there for the Australian government. That was before PNG became independent. It was during that time, after 4 years working for the government, that Walindi was a broken down cocoa plantation, and it had been abandoned, and I got it fairly cheap from the bank, and then I developed it. But maybe Cecilie wants to step in there and bring her story up to date, then we can go on.
Yes, okay. I came to Papua New Guinea in 1972 as an employee for the Department of Agriculture, Stock and Fisheries, which was then the Australian administration. And I worked with them for 11 and a half years, and I still do agricultural work from time to time. So that was my reason of why I came to Papua New Guinea. I came to work with the Department of Agriculture and never left.
And never left. And so you and Max had this crazy idea to turn Walindi into one of the top dive resorts in the world. Was that your goal at the beginning? What was your goal?
Certainly not. It was no idea that we would go into diving. It was just that back in the early 70s, there were a lot of expatriates working in the country prior to independence, trying to prepare the country for independence. And of course, amongst them were divers. And they taught us to dive, basically at Walindi in the early 70s. After that, there were travelers would come to Papua New Guinea. I call more travelers than you would call them tourists, because in those days there was no formal diving tourism. And what they were doing, they were looking for good diving around the world. So they would turn up in our capital, Port Moresby, find out who owned a compressor around the country, and ring up. And they used to ring up Walindi and say, "Oh, we hear you've got a compressor, can we come diving?" "Yeah, come over." That was great, because we had someone to dive with, and these people, when they came, were usually very, very complimentary about our diving. We had no idea how good it was at the time, or how diverse it was. And after a while, just through word of mouth, more and more people started coming. In 1978, Cecilie and I decided we'd go to the Red Sea, because in those days, back in the 70s, that was considered the best diving in the world. So we went to Eilat and did a safari down the Sinai Peninsula, diving. And it was wonderful diving, very clear water. I remember that because no rain there. And while the diving was wonderful, there were two things came out of that trip. Was one, I realized we had more than the Red Sea had. And as time went by, it turns out we have twice as much coral and fish and marine life than the Red Sea. And the other thing was that was where everyone went diving. And people would come. We were there in December, so all the Northern Europeans would fly down and do their annual dive trip in the middle of their winter, come down to Eilat. And I noticed how much damage they were doing to the reef, because they were, they didn't mean to. It was just the fact that their fins, they hadn't dived for a whole year. They were very clumsy, and I think that made me very conscious then of how the reef needed to be looked after. So when we went back to Papua New Guinea, that's when we decided maybe we should build a couple of bungalows, and we built the first two in 1983, and we already had a steady stream of people coming because the word had already got out that we were fairly good, or our diving was fairly good. Let's say so.
Yeah, no, that's it.
That's how it started.
That's how it started, and went from there.
So how many rooms do you have now? How many bungalows do you have now?
We have 20 rooms. There's 12 bungalows and 8 what we call plantation house rooms. There are 2 blocks of 4 rooms, all en suite. But the bungalows, of course, they're individual, so they're very nice. It's very spread out. Probably not the most economical resort in the world. It's almost half a mile long from one end to the other.
Yeah.
So it takes a fair bit of looking after.
So, but you don't have to go to the gym to work out because you're
No.
you get it doing your resort. Well, when did you decide to get the Febrina going?
Our friend Alan Raby, he was bringing up a boat from Australia called the Reef Explorer, and 2 of the main owners of that was Ron and Valerie Taylor, and he would do trips up there, and he'd drop into Walindi, and of course he realised himself how good the diving was, and none of us had any money, but back then, but we decided we wanted a liveaboard, and that's the situation today. Eventually we got Febrina in 1991, and Alan's our partner in Febrina today.
And then from there you decided you were going to have a marine conservation center. When did that all come about?
Once again, that goes back to our visit to the Red Sea. It was always in the back of my mind that we needed to. I realized we had something special, and my dive manager at the time was a young fellow called Philip Munday, and he was a very bright young man. He was too bright to stay on as a dive manager. He's now Dr. Philip Munday at JC University in Rockhampton.
Well, he won a Fulbright scholarship.
Yeah, he won the Fulbright scholarship there. And with Philip, when he left Walindi and went back to university at James Cook University, and we obviously stayed in touch, and between Philip and myself, we decided we needed a research centre, just a small facility. We realised that Kimbe Bay was special and it needed to be looked at. And the other people that got involved was the Nature Conservancy. They were convinced to come and have a look at Kimbe Bay, and they did, and immediately realised that there was something special. And they organised a rapid ecological survey in end of 1994. They paid for the scientists to come in. Walindi, I provided the boats, accommodation, and all the meals. So it was a joint effort. It was certainly more than we could afford at the time, still, but it started. It was from that survey that they realised that Kimbe Bay was very high in diversity, marine life. And then in 1995, the European Union, they were the ambassador in Papua New Guinea at the time was very conservation minded, and he was very concerned about the logging that was going on in Papua New Guinea, and especially on New Britain, our island. He wanted to get an eco-forestry project going, and I offered the land, and they basically built the facilities for this eco-forestry project on Walindi. And into the deal was, I said, I want a small marine facility, research facility, which they did. It was only a small building, but it was there. That was the start of it. And since then, we've been visiting marine biologists visiting. We've had quite a number of PhD students through there, have done their PhD at Walindi, and also terrestrial people who were interested in the terrestrial side. And that's how Mahonia started.
And Mahonia is still going. You have regular visitors, scientists and researchers coming from James Cook University in Australia and elsewhere. I understand they show up at your place because I'm sure part of it's the hospitality, but of course you got the diversity that is incredible. I love your story because it's so organic. You guys just kind of followed the energy, and you saw an opportunity, and you realized you were sitting on a very important piece of the reef, and you showed tremendous foresight. How did you have the courage to kind of step out and do this? Because you guys are in a pretty remote place. You're not on the main part of PNG. You're actually on an island off of the mainland. So this is not an easy place to do business. How do you run a resort? How do you do all of this when it's not even close to Port Moresby? How do you do this? What are your tricks?
Well, first start, we get the idea of the island. The island we live on of New Britain is a very, very big island. It's almost as big as Switzerland. So, you're talking about a very big piece of land, really. There's been agricultural development since the late 1960s, and this has, opened up road access to our main town, Kimbe, the airport, Hoskins Airport infrastructure, a wharf there to export the crude palm oil, etc. So we're not as remote as all that, but we do remember a time when you didn't have phones, and you had two-way radios, and if you had a phone, it had to go through a manual point in Ley, another town. Young people today wouldn't even believe that sort of story, but as the technology has progressed, if you're in a remote area these days, you're not that isolated.
So it all works. Now
with great difficulty.
Oh yes, qualify that with great difficulty.
It's not. You say you go down to Australia and you look at dive operations. If something goes wrong, the fix-it man comes around from the closest shop with all the spare parts. That doesn't happen. We have to fix everything ourselves. We have to have spare parts in stock. It's an expensive country to operate in. If you don't have the part, you've got to wait days. We've got a fairly good plane service if the weather's good. Because if it's not good, the plane can't land. But nowadays we have to ring up Australia and we'll get the parts in. That could take up to a week. So you live trying to run a commercial resort. You live on tenterhooks, hoping that you can keep your boats going every day. And I will say, there's only one day in the whole history of Walindi, there's only one day we didn't go diving, and that was. We had 11 inches of rain in a couple of hours and everything was flooded.
Yeah.
So, but the boats were still working.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm thinking because it is so remote and you can't just call up the fix-it man, it may make it easier in a way for you to be more sustainable than other resorts that have everything very easily accessible. What do you think about that statement? Am I onto something or no?
We still have to use diesel generators to produce enough electricity. 2/3 of the day we're on diesel generators. The other third of the day we go onto battery power and run during 11 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning. We'll be running on battery power, which is enough because most divers want to go to bed fairly early. So by 11 o'clock, we have the fans and the lights still work in their bungalows. So we've cut that down. We've cut the amount of diesel down. If we're in a quiet period, some months of the year are very quiet and we'll turn the generators off in the afternoon for 3 or 4 hours. But the guests, if they come back from diving early, they still have fans and light in their bungalows if they need it. A lot of the food, well, Cecilie can talk more about that, is grown locally. We're organic in the sense without even trying to be, because all our stuff is grown in the village. So we use a lot of village produce.
What about your community? How do you work with your community? I'm interested. You must. I'm assuming you don't bring all your employees in from Australia. You must hire local people. So how do you get employees to the standard of what divers expect? What do you do?
Most of our dive staff are trained up to at least dive master level nowadays. I have an expatriate dive manager who's more a trainer, who has all the qualifications that are required to keep our staff at an international level. And we have 12 dive staff now, who most of them are at dive master level. But these people are really interested in their job. They're just wonderful dive guides. The compliments we get about our dive staff are incredible. Yeah. I do know of some operations out of Australia who tried to operate in PNG, and they were, I guess, afraid of the level of education that they needed to deal with in PNG, and would fly in dive masters from Australia on a regular basis, swap them around. It was a big failure because they didn't know the reef. Where our guys, all local, from the village, can find anything, things that we can't find anymore. Our side's gone, but they'll find stuff that big. It's they know where to go, they know what to look for, they know the habitats, and they can really make the experience for the diver that much higher because of how they interact with the reef and how they know the reef. And that's one of our greatest assets as a dive operation. Equally, we have a lot of trouble in the bungalows. People come from a village society. Their culture is different, so they have a lot of problems. We have problems keeping things to an international standard, but we work at it and we're fairly good at it. A lot of training goes into it.
I was going to ask you about do you have any problems with people fishing off the reef? I mean, in a lot of destinations, there's a conflict between the locals and the expat operators. What is that situation where you are?
Yeah, we do have problems. The one thing that's developed, even though there's a big cultural clashes, but in the sense that, expatriate divers, you're generally very well educated people who immediately understand the problems and how to look after the reef, where village people sometimes just don't know what. Sometimes there's another operation that does fishing and they throw the fish back, and the village people just don't understand this. It's like you eat them.
Yeah.
So that's what you're up against. But one thing over the years is there's been a lot of mistrust, trust. You have to build up trust. And I think we're at a level where they trust us. We have been for quite a few years. And the village people are extremely proud of Walindi. I mean, here we are in the middle of the jungle, and Walindi's become world famous in the diving community anyway. It's become a very famous dive resort, and for its size, we get a publicity well beyond any other resort of a similar size in Australia. Just doesn't get that level of publicity that Walindi does. So there's a lot of pride in Walindi. So generally there's a lot of respect for what we do, and they do respect that. So they don't trash the reefs. Over years, we built up a lot of land tour type businesses with the village people. Basically, we provide the customers, and it's their own little projects. They may be walking tours, bird watching, visits to war wrecks. This is their business. And, that's up and down like a yo-yo sometimes. We've probably developed 100, there's 10 working. So, it's gradually developing a trust in what we're trying to do, where in the beginning it was always, what are they up to? They're just making millions of dollars out of us. That's not the case.
If that were only your problem.
Our biggest problem is staying afloat.
Expectations don't match the reality.
Yeah. And the other thing that has really helped us, and this might sound a bit unusual, is the oil palm industry itself. They actually make good money out of oil palm. And
the smallholders.
The smallholder people, they have their own blocks of oil palm. And that takes a lot of pressure off the reef.
Yeah.
There's very little village fishing on the reef. They actually make quite a bit of money. That they prefer tin fish, actually.
Yeah. Also,
Cecilie could talk more about
also, the people surrounding Kimbe Bay are more land-orientated people. They're very good horticulturalists. For example, their food sources, principally root crops, carbohydrate sources, as opposed to a diet that's principally fish or protein that way. So that's one thing. Plus the smallholders, village oil palm is widely developed. Around Kimbe Bay, there's actually thousands and thousands and thousands of smallholder village farmers with 2 hectares of oil palm that have income from that source.
And this protects the reef. It keeps coming up, of course, everywhere there's poverty, the reefs are so impacted. And as soon as you provide people with alternate incomes to fishing off the reefs, the reefs start to come back. Time and time again, we're seeing this. And many times it's people like you who are providing opportunities for other ways to make money. And this oil palm, and I understand that it's pretty sustainable because they're small holders. It's pretty sustainable kind of agriculture, unlike some other places in the world where that's not. So that it's really quite fascinating. As soon as we start to see the relationship between poverty, the inverse relationship between poverty and healthy reefs, and lack of awareness and
Yes.
healthy reefs, these inverse relationships. When we, as dive businesses, we can address both of those issues through the business, which is what you are doing and have been doing for quite some time, and it's you can see that it works, and I know Judy Lowe, who's a speaker, I know she's coming to your place precisely because of this. Is that yes. You are truly bringing in the local community. It's a two-way street. You've done, you have the trust now, and they are developing alternate sources of income, which takes a tremendous amount of pressure off the marine resources. And this is one of the key things we're trying to get across in this summit, is that as a dive business, you're in a very powerful position to change things. And I know that's not the only thing you've been doing. I know you've been doing other things to help change things. So, Cecilie, give us an update on what's going on with Mahonia Na Dari.
Oh, Mahonia, we have been conducting courses there for marine conservation youth education since, Mahonia was incorporated in 1998, but the first marine environment education program was conducted in February 1997. It was actually at Hoskins High School nearby. So this program still goes today, goes annually, and it is directed at high school students, primary school and elementary school students. And we have an education officer down there, and she conducts courses for high schools in the local area that go for 9 Saturdays. And it's based on basic marine biology, marine ecology, marine conservation, land use impacts, and areas like that. So fish dissection by James Cook University, their resident researchers. So these sort of purely marine education programs are run down there, and we can take this down to the level of a morning visit by an elementary school, for an aspect out of there which might be appropriate. So that program does have application, I feel, for other Coral Triangle Initiative countries.
How many kids did you do?
Yes. Last year we had a community conservation officer. He's just left us for another avenue of employment, but he worked for 4 years doing the whole of Kimbe Bay. The education officer, she more or less does the concentrated courses at the research centre. But the community conservation officer, he would start sort of one end of the bay and go right to the other end, which is actually a fair distance, is quite a long way. And he would, on average, do about 10,000 people on a face-to-face basis, of which 7,000 would be school children. So in Papua New Guinea, because this is the most lingually savvy nation on earth, the face-to-face contact is very important. Oral communication is very important. That's the way it gets done.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what about your guests? How do they get involved in Mahonia Na Dari? Do they walk over to the centre, or what?
Yeah. They're quite welcome to, walk over to the centre. Some people, have been involved over the years with material support. Some educators, have contributed. We mainly get our funding by grant applications.
The other thing too is the PhD student. We continually have a PhD student from James Cook, and part of on site. So they get involved on the education side as well.
Yeah.
So that sort of keeps our scientific standard up in the courses.
Yeah, we call them resident researchers, and they'll be doing a PhD, and they may be there 3 to 4 years even. So there's continuity with that. And we've had some excellent resident researchers from James Cook University.
Wonderful. Do your guests get to chat with them? Do they do presentations for the guests and all that kind of thing?
Oh, not so much presentations, but the resident researcher, we give a donation of the resident researcher being able to take evening meals at the resort as, a support for this mechanism. Yeah, and it works quite well. So on a casual chat-to-chat basis, people can engage with the resident researcher.
Hobnob, as it were.
Never heard like that, but that's good. Yeah.
Well, I'm fascinated that you have had the courage to step out and do this, and I'm also amazed that you're in such a out of the way place, and yet you're able to do so many things that are basically you're on the path to sustainability. You're doing so many of the things that are required of us as we move forward in our businesses. You're so well positioned. Because you've been doing this for so long. I'm just looking at the dates. 1983, you started your resort. 1991, you got the Febrina. 1997, you started the center. I mean, you've just been kind of humming along. Like, you haven't been pushing anything, but you're just like humming along. Okay, let's try this. Okay, let's try this. And I like it. It's no fuss or feathers. You're just doing your thing, and you're getting tremendous, just tremendous press for it, and that's probably not what your goal was. Your goal is just to be able to run your business, but it's really been amazing. I know, Cecilie, you were saying that when you got back from, or was it when you went to New York you were inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame? This was national news.
Yes, and PNG, yeah.
I love it. You're heroes. I love it. You're heroes. Oh, this is so wonderful.
Oh, lots of people are heroes. Lots of people.
Well, you're certainly my hero for sure. Of all the things you've done, all the things you're doing. What are you going to be doing next? What are your plans going forward?
Okay. Well, you're probably first off the block to hear this. So, within our area, we have an elementary school called the Max Benjamin Elementary School.
They actually called it the Max Benjamin Memorial Elementary School.
Till we pointed out there was a little bit of a problem about the memorial business. But anyway, now that school commenced in 2011. It is now probably the top elementary school in a rural context for the province of West New Britain. It has a library. A wonderful Japanese lady gave a donation for a principal's house so the principal could reside. It has 2 double classrooms, and there are 4 classes, and there's about 113 students. That is big for an elementary school in Papua New Guinea in a rural context. Now, we have just set up and commenced with the most generous of support of the West New Britain Provincial Governor Mutherville, to commence a primary school called the Walindi Primary School, which will also be on area donated and set aside by us on Walindi Plantation. So that's the next project.
You guys don't stop. You just keep trucking. I love it.
Yeah, but the body's not as woolly as it used to be, I can assure you. But anyway.
but this is just wonderful. It shows the kind of trust and respect that you've gained in your community there, and just how much you give. You're very generous. What you two have been doing is you're very, very generous. I just keep saying how you just keep giving, and things just keep happening in such positive ways. It's really phenomenal. Do you do anything with the tourism board to help them?
Oh, Max is on.
My son has just become chairman of the West New Britain Tourist Board, but I've been on the National Tourism Board for quite a number, off and on for a number of years, or the last 20 years actually. I've been on it the last 8 years now, so yeah, I'm very involved with the national side of the other. We also have a couple of business associations like the Divers Association and the Tourism Association. That's more the business side, and I'm on both of those as well. So we're very involved in the tourism aspects of PNG.
The sustainable pathway. It's a pathway that you actually have to be on, and you can't just be running your business as though there's nothing going on around you. You really have to, reach out into the community and then and be a part of what's going on. And it's so clear what you're doing. And it's clear why you're so successful, because this is exactly what you do. You don't wait. You don't say someone should do this. You just do it, and it's working so well for you, and working well for the community that you're in. It's really quite. I'm coming. How do we get to you? That was one of my questions. Do you, let's say we were coming from LA, how would we get to you? What would we do?
There's quite a few options. The most common route would to become via Australia, Sydney, Brisbane, Cairns, and then fly to PNG.
Port Moresby.
Port Moresby's the capital. You have to go through there to clear customs, and then there's a good network of aircraft around the country. PNG is very dependent on air travel. So we have 2, maybe 4 flights a day into our airport from Port Moresby and other centres.
It's only about an hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's an hour and 10 minutes, Port Moresby to our airport. So Australia is probably the most common way to come in. The other way is to come in via Hong Kong. That's 3 times a week. The Philippines is 4 times a week. Japan once a week. You can come by Fiji. We go to Fiji, and New Guinea goes to Fiji twice a week. So there's a fair number of routes in. It's not cheap. It always involves 2 airlines. To go to Indonesia, you can usually do it on 1 ticket, 1 airline. To come to PNG, you have to use 2 airlines, which tends to push the price up. Air New Guinea is a very safe airline. I think it's rated by the United Nations as the safest in the 3rd world, so that's a good thing. So, they don't have redundancy. Something goes wrong, the plane doesn't go, you're late. But I always tell my angry clients it's better to be a day late than splattered across a mountain. So it's they have very high safety standards. So I'm all for that.
I want to suggest to people that they put you on their list, because you are in one of the most incredibly diverse and beautiful and pristine areas of the world, and you're doing whatever you can to keep it that way, and this is what this summit is all about, is what we can do to be a part of the solution, and it's pretty clear that you have done multiple things to make sure that where you've hung your hat is going to stay pristine for a long, long time, as far as you're concerned. And I just want to thank you for being such incredible role models for us. It's pretty clear you didn't start off that way. You just kind of said, "Oh, look at this! I got a cheap resort. I got a good deal." And now look where you're at. It's just incredible. So again, thank you for taking the time to be with us. It's not easy to track you two down, and but I was told I had to. I had a lot of pressure to make sure that I got you. Remember, Cecilie? I was saying, okay, if you're going to be in Australia in June, we still could do it.
Yeah.
We could do it live.
Yes. Yes.
So again,
yes, it's the technology where we are. Well, it has its issues, and it's not quite like here. We're in Cairns at the moment,
right.
passing through. But this is where the technology will work for this particular interview.
Yeah. Well, listen. Again, thank you so much. Appreciate all your time, and I encourage people to visit you. And when you're at DEMA or ADEX, I encourage people to visit you when you're visiting those big shows. You're doing amazing things, and thank you again.
Okay.
Thanks,
Laurie. We'll see you later.
Safe trip back to Papua New Guinea.